Most people buying a new construction home in BC have never heard of the law that is supposed to protect them, and the people selling that home are counting on that. It is called REDMA, the Real Estate Development and Marketing Act, and it is the primary piece of legislation governing how new construction properties are marketed and sold in British Columbia. It has been on the books since 2005, and yet the vast majority of first-time buyers walk into sales centers with no idea it exists, what it does for them, or more importantly, where it completely falls short. Here is what I can tell you after years of working in this market. REDMA does some genuinely important things for buyers, but it was also written with two goals in mind: protecting you and protecting the developer's ability to do business. And when those two goals are in contention with each other, which they often are, the outcome is not always what you would hope for. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly what REDMA does, where it came from, what protections it actually gives you, and where the holes are that still leave buyers exposed, because knowing this law, even at a basic level, puts you in a completely different position than the buyer walking in next to you who has never heard of it.
You only get one chance to buy or sell your next home. Let's get it right.
Before we kick off, if you're thinking about buying or selling in White Rock or South Surrey, the biggest mistake you can make right now is relying on outdated advice or guessing your next move. The market has shifted, and what worked even 6 months ago could cost you tens of thousands today. My name is Darren. I'm a realtor living and working here in White Rock and South Surrey, and I've been helping families buy and sell since 2007. Since then, I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of clients, many of whom have found me right here on this YouTube channel because they wanted straight answers, real local insight, and a strategy that actually works. On this channel, I break down exactly what's happening in our market, what to watch out for, and how to make smart decisions so you don't leave any money on the table. So if you want to stay ahead of the market, hit subscribe. And if you're serious about making a move, there's a link below to book a quick call with me and my team. No pressure, just clear advice so you can move forward with confidence. To understand why REDMA exists, you have to go back to the late 1990s in British Columbia. And if you were around during that period, or if you have heard older homeowners talk about it, you may already know what I'm referring to. BC was in the middle of a leaky condo crisis that was, by any measure, a disaster for homeowners all across the province. The construction boom of the late 1980s and the majority of the 1990s were found to have serious envelope deficiencies, meaning water was getting in, causing rot, mold, and in many cases, rendering entire buildings uninhabitable. And the repair costs, they were absolutely staggering. The buyers who owned those units were left holding the bill. And at the same time, consumer complaints about developer practices were mounting. The legislation that existed at that time, Part 2 of the Real Estate Act, was built on what is called a prospectus model. Developers filed an initial document at the start of a project, and that was largely it. There was no requirement to update buyers as things changed. No mechanism to reflect delays, cost overruns, or material changes to what was being sold. Buyers were committing to contracts based on information that could become outdated over a multi-year construction window, and they had very little recourse when it actually did. So in 2004, the government passed REDMA, the Real Estate Development and Marketing Act, which came into force in 2005, and it replaced the static prospectus model with something fundamentally different: a continuous disclosure regime. The idea was simple but significant. Instead of developers filing one document and then walking away, they would now be required to keep that disclosure current. And if something material changed, the timeline, the finishings, the financing structure, buyers had to be alerted immediately. The philosophical shift was just as important as the technical one. REDMA was built on the principle that displacing something called caveat emptor, which basically means buyer beware, in favor of a framework that put the burden of transparency on the developer, not the buyer. For the first time, the law was explicitly saying that the person with all of the information had an obligation to share it fully, plainly, and truthfully. And that was the intent. It was a meaningful step forward. But as we are going to get into, intent and outcome are not always the same thing. Here is where it gets really interesting. And honestly, where it gets a little bit uncomfortable if you're a buyer. REDMA was not written purely as a consumer protection law. Let's be very clear about that. The courts have actually confirmed this. In fact, in a case called Wu versus Ani, the BC Court of Appeal explicitly recognized that REDMA has twin goals. The first is protecting buyers. The second, however, is giving developers the flexibility to market and sell units early in the construction cycle before the building exists, so they can secure the pre-sale financing financing that lenders require to fund construction in the first place. Now, on the surface, that might sound reasonable, and in many ways it is. The pre-sale model is how most large developments get built. Developers need a certain percentage of units sold before a bank will finance construction. That is just the reality of how the industry works, and REDMA was designed to accommodate that reality while still drawing a line around what developers can and cannot do to buyers in the process. But again, here's the tension. When a law is trying to serve two masters at the same time, the buyer sitting across the table and the developer running the project, compromises must be made. And those compromises show up in the fine print of the legislation in ways that most buyers would never think to look for. In fact, the courts have had to step in regularly to figure out where that line sits, and over time, the interpretation of REDMA has actually shifted. In the early years, after the act came into force, courts took a strongly protective view, interpreting the law very generously in favor of the buyers. But after the 2008 financial crisis, when property values absolutely plummeted and buyers started using minor technical errors in disclosure statements to get out of contracts that were no longer profitable, the courts, well, they pulled back. They started talking about balance, about not allowing REDMA to become a tool for buyers to escape deals on technicalities. The result is a law that does meaningful things for you, but is also being shaped over time by the economic interests of the development industry. And that is something every buyer in BC deserves to understand before they ever sign anything. So let's talk about what REDMA actually puts in your corner as a consumer, because there are three protections in this legislation that are real, that are meaningful, and that every buyer purchasing new construction in BC should know cold. The first is what is called the 7-day rescission period. When you sign a contract to purchase a new construction unit in BC, you have 7 days to change your mind. No penalty, no fees, no questions asked. You simply serve written notice on the developer within 7 days of signing, or 7 days from when you received and acknowledged the disclosure statement, whichever is later. You do this and you are out. The contract is canceled and your deposit must be returned within 15 days. Now, here is something that catches a lot of buyers completely off guard, and I want you to really hear this part. The 7-day rescission period kind of works the opposite way than what most people expect. If you sign a contract and then have second thoughts, you cannot just go quiet and hope the deal falls apart. Doing nothing does not kill the deal. In fact, doing nothing means the contract actually becomes legally binding the moment those 7 days expire. No deposit paid, no communication, it does not matter. If you did not serve written notice, you are in. This is the exact opposite of how subject removals work on a resale property. As an example, with a resale, if a buyer does not actively remove their subjects in writing, the deal dies. With new construction presale under REDMA, silence is not an exit. Silence is acceptance. So if you sign at a launch event on a Friday night, feeling excitement of the moment, and you wake up Monday morning with serious doubts, you need to act. Get your realtor or your lawyer on the phone and get your written notice served before your 7 days are up. This is not a free market. That rescission period is your one clean window to walk away. Use it deliberately. Do not let it expire by accident. The second protection is deposit security. Under Section 18 of REDMA, every deposit you pay on a new construction purchase must be held in trust by a lawyer, a notary public, or a real estate brokerage. That money is legally separated from the developer's operating funds. They cannot use it to pay their contractors, cover their overhead, or fund construction unless very specific conditions are met, including the purchase of what's called a deposit protection insurance contract. What this means for you in practical terms is that if a project fails, if the developer goes insolvent or the project gets canceled, your deposit is not considered part of the developer's assets. It should come back to you. Now, I say it should because there have been cases in BC where developers misappropriated deposit funds and did not hold them in trust as they were required to. And in one case, $10 million in deposits were not properly secured. The BC FSA, or British Columbia Financial Services Authority, took action. Fines were issued, but the damage to buyers in that situation was significant and it was real. The third protection is what's called title assurance. Before a developer can legally market units for sale, they must have made what the legislation calls adequate arrangements to ensure that you will actually receive clean title to what you are buying. That means any construction mortgage or financial encumbrances on the property have to be discharged from your unit before or at the time you take possession. You are not supposed to close on a brand new home and inherit the developer's debt along with it. This one tends to be somewhat invisible to buyers, and that's actually a good sign. When it works, you never think about it. But it is worth knowing that it exists because the obligation is on the developer to have this sorted out before they ever open the sales center doors. So these are three protections: the rescission period, the deposit trust requirements, and title assurance. Know them, and if you're ever in a situation where you feel like any of these are not being honored, get a lawyer involved immediately. So now that you know what REDMA does for you, let's talk about where it doesn't go far enough. But hey, before we get into that, a quick heads up: if you're even thinking about buying a home anywhere in BC, you're going to want to grab a copy of our free guide, 18 grants and rebates for home buyers. We've pulled together every program we could find, from federal, provincial, and even some lesser known local ones, plus links, tips, and simple ways to actually use them. Most of these I find are buried, confusing, or completely missed by buyers, and they could save you thousands. It's free, and you can download it right now by using the link in the description of this video. Okay, so let's get back to where REDMA struggles to keep up protecting someone like you, a would-be home buyer, because this is the part that rarely gets discussed. And for a first-time buyer, it's just as important as everything we've already covered. The first gap is what happens when a project gets canceled. And this happens more than most people realize. A developer can cancel a project, citing an inability to secure financing or failure to meet presale targets. And under REDMA, all they're required to do is simply return your deposit. That's it. Your original deposit, plus any interest, if that was actually stipulated in the contract, would go back to you. Here's why this is a problem. Let us say that you signed a contract 3 years ago on a unit priced at $600,000. The market moved during that time. That same unit today might be worth $700,050. For those of you at home that are not math wizards, well, that's an increase in value of almost $150,000. So you tied up your money. You planned your life around this purchase, and the developer, well, they canceled. You get your deposit back, but you cannot buy the same thing for the same price anymore. 3 years of market appreciation gone. And REDMA has nothing to say about that. There is no penalty for developers who cancel and relaunch at higher prices. The law simply doesn't address it. The second gap connects directly to something we talked about in a previous video. Many of the people staffing new construction sales centers are not licensed real estate professionals. They are employees of the developer. They are not held to the same ethical standards or financial duties as a licensed realtor. Provincial regulatory review actually flagged this as a problem back in 2018 and recommended that it be addressed. As of today, and actually filming this video, it hasn't been. This means it's almost like buying a home like for sale by owner from somebody that really isn't held to the same standards by the province that someone like a real estate licensee might be. Do you think in that situation that there could be a few things that go wrong? Well, absolutely, there could be. And the third gap is perhaps the most frustrating one of all. REDMA requires developers to give a buyer reasonable opportunity to read something called the disclosure statement, a bunch of information they put together to help the buyer make a somewhat informed decision. But the courts have confirmed that a reasonable opportunity to read something is not the same as a reasonable opportunity to understand something. These documents are often hundreds of pages of dense legal language written by lawyers for lawyers. Most first-time buyers are handed this document in an emotionally charged sales environment and given 7 days to work through it. The right to know is only meaningful if you can actually understand what you're being told. And right now, that gap is real. And it's not even what is just being told to you on that document. There's also the gap between what is being told to you and what is not being said. We'll touch on that a little bit more in a moment. Look, REDMA is not a bad law. For what it was designed to do, it moved the needle significantly from what existed before it. The 7-day rescission period, the deposit trust requirements, the continuous disclosure obligation. These are real protections that did not exist for buyers in BC before 2025. And if you are buying new construction in this province, you are better off with REDMA than without it. But knowing that a law exists is not the same thing as being protected by it. The gaps are real, the limitations are real, and the people on the other side of that sales center table have been navigating this legislation and its boundaries for a lot longer than you have. So here's what I want you to take away from today's video. REDMA gives you a framework. It does not give you a guarantee. The 7-day rescission period is your most powerful tool. Use it deliberately and do not let it expire by accident. Make sure your deposit is being held in trust. And before you sign anything, have someone in your corner who's looking out for you, not the developer. If this video was useful to you, share it with someone who's thinking about buying new construction right now. The more informed buyers walking into sales center, the better the outcomes are going to be for everyone. And that is exactly why we keep making these videos. And if you have not already watched the video we put together on the specific tactics developers use inside that sales process, the incentive games, the contract clauses, the upgrade markups, the financing risks, I would strongly encourage you to watch that one as well, because REDMA sets the rules of the game, but knowing how the game is actually played is a completely different conversation. The good news is that video, it's coming up right now. What if I told you that developers have a secret strategy specifically designed to get more money out of home buyers like you, and it's completely legal?